Hi everybody. Today I have the honour of speaking to Stephen Paul. Stephen is a person-centred relational therapist with 40 plus years of experience. He went to boarding school and was expelled from rugby school in the 60s at the age of 17. He has had much therapy on his own boarding school years and has witnessed that therapy can help heal the wounds, however painful. His experience includes working in a boarding school for boys with emotional and behavioural problems, a child and adolescent psychiatric unit, being head of a therapeutic school, and 19 years in a university setting. He has written books on the therapy relationship and the place of love in therapy. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, great. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. And I always like to start the podcast with letting people know where we connected. And for us, it was through Seen and Heard, and you coming onto the specialist therapist, counselling and coaching directory that we've got there because of the work that you do. But also that I know that you were trying to organise a walk in Yorkshire with one of our directors for local boarding school survivors up there.
Yeah, that's right. Through the Facebook Boarding School Survivors group, people really try to meet up and connect with each other because it's so helpful. And so we're organising one which happening in Yorkshire Sculpture Park one Saturday at the beginning of March. So that's why I contacted you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. The power of connection. And then as soon as we had a first conversation, I felt a great synergy with your work, with you, with your life journey, and I knew I had to learn a bit more. So we'll have an opportunity to go into that today. But so I'd love to know a little bit about your personal journey, particularly your early years and running up to school, your family life, things like that. Yeah, can you talk me through a little bit about how things were for you?
Yes, it's 1950s, so very traditional conservative Britain. My mother had lost twins before me at 9 months, and so 5 years later I turned up, and I was very special to her and also very precious to her. And they worked in pubs and later managed a big hotel, and so I was looked after by various nursemaids or whatever. So it didn't really have a good start at all. My parents were never there for me. When they were there for me, they doted on me to the nth degree. I didn't know whether I was coming or going as a little boy. I can also remember at the age of about 3 or maybe a little bit old, 3.5, it was Christmas, and in the hotel trade, Christmas is busy. So I was sent away to stay with some people I didn't even know. I can remember before they took me, hiding in a big airing cupboard in the hotel and screaming and crying at the thought of being taken away from my mum and my dad. And that stayed with me throughout. It was a real terror, and other experiences like that from early life. The paradox of being really loved, but at the same time, my parents, my mum particularly, not being there for me and wanting other things for me. So then I was, started on the private school trail, really, convent school, prep school, and all of that. And again, this sort of trying to turn you into a little man when you were just a boy was very much part of the era, really.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I can really resonate with a lot of what you're saying there. I think my mom's family was in the pub trade in the north of England, and similarly, they just weren't available really. And if they were available, often they'd been socialising with the customers and may not have been completely compos mentis. And you mentioned prep school and things. So how old were you when you first went away from home?
Well, I didn't go away from home till I was 13. Okay. I went to prep school, to day prep school, which was sort of all right, but just, what they were like, these places really just training you up to go off to public school or private school or whatever. And again, to make little upper middle class men out of you who, and all of that. It's interesting to note as well that I was initially brought up Catholic and was sent to a convent school before prep school. And again, was told in no uncertain way by by the nuns that, I was a little boy and I was bad. You're a bad boy, don't know what I'd done, but that stuck with me as well, that just being who I was wasn't really acceptable somehow. And that's a theme that seems to go through, really.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very sad, but it's certainly something that we hear quite a lot from lots of people, from whether it's education, whether it's the boarding school side of things, or growing up, is that feeling that they're not acceptable as they are,
Mhm.
and therefore the world, the family unit starts to chip bits off, and shape the young person to kind of something that is vaguely acceptable, but it obviously leaves a mark, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I can remember my mum, sing the song "Walk Tall" to me, making me walk around the room with a book on my head, and I can remember in social gatherings, like as my parents were very, very social, and when we ever had people around, I could never allowed to be angry. I always had to learn, always had to smile, always had to smile. And so as an adult, I can remember when I was really angry, I'd be smiling, and people are saying, "But you're smiling," and I'd be absolutely furious, And so that stayed with me right from those early years.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And your family, was it? Do you have siblings, or are you? I know that
No, I was the only child because my mum had lost two children
because of the
before me.
twins. Yeah, because the twins. I wondered if she.
Parents were older anyway. My dad was
Mm,
very much older than my mother, so he was a bit out of it. But it was very, very sort of middle class, drinks, dinner, cravats. As an 11-year-old, I remember going around sports jacket and cravat on, whatever the weather, wherever I went, when I just wanted to play out on the street or whatever. And friends were carefully selected or deselected
mm,
and all that sort of business.
mm. Yeah, thank you. And as a young man, then what were you into? What did you love?
That's cricket. I used to play was it cricket on my own or games of board games on my own where I play against myself and things like that.
Mm,
And then the long tour holidays, you might spend one day playing with one friend playing cricket, one day building a den in the woods with another friend.
mm,
We used to really like going out on bikes for all day, with like a pan on the back and a baked potato and baked beans and just spending the whole day out. And it was just a great time. That particular aspect of my youth was just great.
mm. Well, thank you for sharing that. It brings back a lot of memories of mine. I think being an only child as well. I think there was you did a lot of stuff on your own. You got used to it, and
Yeah,
with parents who
absolutely.
were engaged in whatever they were doing, absent parents, if you like, you had to make your own sort of fun, didn't you? But
Yeah.
oh, thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. Yeah, and then you mentioned boarding school and that big change for you. So tell me a little bit about that. How did that come
Yeah.
around?
Yeah. I was at prep school and my parents by then had left the hotel trade. And my dad had sort of not been very successful in the business. So it was decided to enter me for the 11 plus. And I got into the grammar school in the area because I got into the grammar school. I was really good at sport, pretty good academically, and when I was 13, there came a chance to sit common entrance and get a scholarship to public school. So my parent, I came in from school and said, "Mum, Dad, I could do a scholarship," and they were absolutely up in arms with it. So yes, do it, enter it. And I got one of two places into rugby school then at the age of 13. My parents weren't well off. They were, averagely well off, but not rugby school well off standard. So I was sort of kicked into the maelstrom of really upper class public school from a sort of lower middle class family, and had to sort of cover my tracks and be and not be that person. So I learned very early on to pretend that I was something else. There was a boy in the same boarding house as me with the same surname, and he had got a reputation of being a bedwetter, whittler he was called. So I had to pretend I had nothing to do with him, which I didn't, but I actually started to develop real anxiety about going to the loo in the night, which actually developed into almost a physical problem, which has stayed with me all through my life. because somebody else had the problem and I had the same name as him. So I always remember that. That used to be terrible at nights, and the fear of going to the loo and being found out and stuff like that. And it started that whole thing of needing to go to the loo whenever I got anxious. Yeah, I mean, I was very good starting off at rugby because I was very good athletically. I mean, I became the junior athletics captain, and then I'm intermediate athletics captain. I was very good academically to start, very good. But it was the 60s, and rugby school was very, very traditional. And I was listening to Marianne Faithfull and the Rolling Stones and stuff like that. So, we can imagine that this is a difficult time. And then I think I was about 14, and one day a couple of my mates in my boarding house said, let's go down and get some whiskey. They were a year older than me. So I went on with them. I went down and I stood outside the off license and they went in. Later on, it all got found out by the powers that be. We'd been followed and we all got sent down for a term. And I got sent down, even though all I'd done was stand outside an off license with two older boys who went in. And that was incredibly, that's when I started to develop this thing for injustice, which became a big thread throughout my life. And also the ignominy of being sent home from school and having to spend half a term being educated locally at the college and stuff like that. It was pretty awful. But I did sort of come back with a real chip on my shoulder, I think, after that, about being badly treated, which really affected the next couple of years of life there.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen. That sounds really traumatic. As a young person, you're just trying to find your way, and you get, head off to an institution, and it's not home. There's a lot of separation. You're trying to fit in, like say with the issues around the name and bedwetting, and then you say you start to perhaps get sucked into a crowd, and then you have an incident like that. I had something very similar with smoking, where I was sent home from school for being caught smoking. I was grassed up by the other boys whilst I was at home, and yeah, the school rang my parents whilst I was home, sort of faking sick because I didn't know at the time it was anxiety. I was sick to my stomach, but yeah, it really unravelled. And when I came back, there was the the shame of having been caught, the having been outed by what was supposed to be my friends, and I was never the same at that school after that. That was around 11 or 12. So yeah, I can really resonate with what you're saying.
It's really similar, isn't it? And it's again the same pattern, or how they treat people who don't totally fit, which is my experience. Yeah, and then I sort of went back, and in fact, I was just reading yesterday about Gordonstown and how the guy who started it, it was all about suppressing puberty, the cold showers, the athleticism, and whatever. And of course, then I was, 14, and puberty hit with a big time, and no girls, and in the holidays, no girls, at school, no girls. And so my whole sexual development got really affected. I fell in love with a couple of boys, had a couple of sexual encounters, which I personally, for me, didn't really enjoy, and later on rebounded on me when I went back into the big wide world. But so all that stuff about repressed sexuality, injustice. I mean, there was all the 60s, the liberation of the 60s going on, boys coming into school from home with various drugs to try and, starting to think quite differently and starting to see something beyond the my boarding school. The head, my housemaster was a ex-army single man, very odd guy. I imagine today he's probably gay, but we didn't know. I didn't know, but it was all very weird. The whole journey there. I got really into sport for a while. Rugby. I was in all the teams, school teams, head of athletics and all that. But it just started to just question everything, and I suppose it started to come to a head. Well, really came to a head when I saw the film If. And anybody who's seen the film If will resonate. And if you've not seen the film If, when you've been to public school, you should see the film If.
Yeah.
So this is true. what I was going to say, I saw the film If. I went out, I bought an air pistol, and my house had it was a big quadrangle in the middle, and you could look across the quad where we used to play quad hockey, and you could see other studies and all the other rooms around. And so I used to do target practice, and I could be very good at shooting from one study across the quad. And I could hit a light out in the study across the quad. So I was pretty good. I mean, I hadn't actually participated in the CCF. I'd actually got out of it by doing social service, but I could shoot. And, I think that was an expression of my anger, really, with the whole establishment. And it was a bit of a catch-22 because part of me loved the community of the public school, which I hadn't really had at home. The brotherliness, the doing stuff together, the growing up together. I really enjoyed that, but it was a sort of false environment.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got, somebody found out that I had an air pistol, and of course, big trouble ensued, and the head of house didn't like me. He wasn't up to the task, you see, and I could see that. And so one day I shouted him out in the corridor in front of in front of whoever was around. And of course, he scuttled off straight to the housemaster. And the housemaster came out, and I was further gated for another 2 weeks, not allowed to go out or do anything. And of course, that was red rag to a bull. So what did I do? When no one was around, I went downtown, went to the pub, went to the cafes, and they were following me, and then my parents came to visit one day, and I was called into the housemaster's office and told, your parents are taking you away, Stephen. We feel this isn't the school here for you, And I'm sort of laughing and smiling about it, but it was just awful. I cannot tell you, because it was the only community I knew at the time. It was the only friendship group I knew at the time. And I had this whole career thing laid out for me, and the whole thing was just pulled away from under me at a stroke. And what happened, I never saw, I just taken out the straw, never saw anybody straight home. My parents obviously completely gutted, the ignominy and shame for them, and also what to do now. What to do now. And that ended up, it was 1969. I ended up going to a FE college, doing my A levels, and it was the 60s and the hippie era and whatever. And I'd come from upper class boarding school. I thought I might be gay. I wasn't sure anything to do with my sexuality, my identity. Didn't know who I was, where I was going. Didn't know anything at all. So it was a very difficult time, Chris. It was really awful.
Yeah, really, really. My heart's with you, Steve. I'm thinking I can resonate with so much of that. You say the community that within the school, the sports, the good stuff, the challenge is it comes at such a cost. You have to give so much of yourself away to have the benefits, if you like, or to stay in the system, and the sort of hypervigilance required to sort of keep on the right side of the law, not say the wrong things, not fall out with the wrong people. There are benefits, but they come at a cost, and I think that you clearly were experiencing those, and also trying to find your own identity in the 60s against the backdrop of kind of austerity and rules, regulations in the system. So yeah, incidentally, what you mentioned, you had this career path laid out for you. What was it that you thought was going to happen? If
Well, the plan was international banking was the plan,
right,
and I was studying French and German, and I had another friend. He was also studying French and German. He was a bit more together than me. His family were a bit more structured with it all. So that was the plan.
right.
Of course, that went by the wayside. When I left. Yeah, it was a ridiculous plan, really. But that was the plan.
You might have dodged a bullet doing what you do now rather than international banking. That's perhaps a judgment on my behalf. But thank you so much for sharing. So been through school, had this awful separation again. Separation into school and then separation out of school. In this being sort of ignominiously dumped out
Yeah.
without a sort of a safety net, with the shame the family side of things. What came next for you? How did you respond?
Yeah. Well, I'll just throw in a bit then, because when I was 13, I had an aunt who was considered to be an odd aunt, and she worked for Cassell's book publishing company, and she gave me two books. One which was called Freud and the Post-Freudians, and one that was called Yoga by an author called Ernest Wood. They were both sort of quite academic books. And to be frank with you, that was a seed that was planted when I was 13, and that started to shape my whole life. But the reason I say it now is because I was just remembering when I left rugby, and I didn't know who I was, didn't know how to be, and that whole notion of the psychodynamic therapists talk about the full self or the adapted self. You don't know who you are, so this persona self is developed, and that's what I developed at rugby. And then it didn't exist anymore. I was at FE College, where everyone was growing their hair long, smoking weed, not going to lectures, going on demos, drinking lots of music. I'm drinking lots of music, and maybe that's what it was, and taking lots of little pills, I must say. That all went by the wayside. And I remember, trying to pretend I was sort of like, then I was not cool now. It was cool. I'd left rugby and I was cool, and I just didn't know who I was. And I hung out with this older guy, and we sat together and we took some LSD, some acid, and I just realized that it all fell away, and it was like, oh my goodness, and that was a real shock for me that I really struggled to deal with, that I really realized that I didn't know who I was, where I was going. My life had been built on all sorts of false premises. But I sort of cleaved to the sort of the 60s sort of hippie movement. I couldn't do anything with girls. I mean, I had really good girlfriends, but couldn't take it any further. I did wonder a lot if I was gay. I had one or two very good-looking male friends, and I really struggled with what my thoughts and feelings were. So that was a really difficult time, and failed. So I ended up doing 2 years at FE College. The first year failed dismally. My parents found my report, which I didn't think you got reports. They found it, and everything on the report said, "Who is he?" Well, if I knew who he was, I could write comment on him. Never seen him. Me too. That's what it all said, And the only good reports I got was from the sociology lecturer, and I ended up getting a C in sociology, and the art lecturer who used to hang out with a lot in the art department, because that's where the nice girls were, and you didn't have to do any academic work. But I got into drugs. I got into, again, because I had a really inferiority complex that I covered up by being cool. So I started, selling drugs to my friends, and then cannabis. Then one day I was walking outside a pub, and who should come up to me but Chief Inspector of Police? Would you empty your pockets? And that was it. I was dragged away to the police station. I ended up making the front page of many national newspapers, ex-public schoolboy on drugs charge, biggest cannabis charge in Hertfordshire, stuff like that. It was just awful, and the only way, and then I'd borrow some money. I'd borrowed some money to buy the weed, to sell the weed. So then I had to borrow some more money to buy some more weed, to sell some more weed, to pay back the guys I borrowed the money off. And at the same time, I was working as an extra on a film with Lulu called The Cherry Pickers, which was taking place in St Albans. And so I'd worked that weekend there as an extra. We were all just hippies, and I'm actually in the film as a hippie. And there's loads of us hippies in this film. They're just 17, 18-year-old kids with long hair. And walking back from being an extra, oh, it's the police again. Will you empty your pocket, Stephen? I tried to run for it, but they caught me, found some more weed on me, and that was really difficult. So, and I ended up having a suspended sentence for second possession of weed in a month, and also got done because I'd worked as a film extra and earned some money. I'd earned £4, £2 a day for 2 days, and hadn't declared it, so that was fraud or something. Another friend of mine got done, and because he didn't give their address, he was also an ex-public school boy, because he didn't give his address, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. It's just crazy for smoking cannabis. It was beyond belief. So then I fled to Wales. I fled to Wales, lived there with a group of friends in Wales, and had been there a week, and knock at the door. Hello, Stephen. It is Stephen, isn't it? Yes, we're the local drug squad. We just want to see how you're doing and tell you that we're here, you know. So times were difficult, really. And what was also going on then was as I got into sort of trying to search for meaning and truth and purpose in life. And when I'd been at boarding school, when I'd been at rugby, I didn't go to school chapel. I managed to avoid going by all sorts of deceit, but I used to go to the Sunday evening private chapel where you could do your own thing. So I'd got this sort of thing about trying to find a contact with God or higher beings or spirituality. So living in Wales, I sort of tried to meditate and tried to get high and tried to find connections with and all of that. And had a real dark night of the soul as well, because I had a very poor sense of self. And decided that I would go to India to find a guru, and sold everything. And we're sitting on the beach in Aberystwyth one day, which was every Wednesday, all the hippie people used to go shopping in Aberystwyth to buy their rice and oats and that. And met this guy who said, "Oh, there's this Mahatma going to come to Aberystwyth next week. He's talking about this and talking about that." So I thought, well, that's what I'm going to find when I go to India. So I decided, well, I'll go along and see what it's all about. And classic really, fragmented sense of self, no real sense of community, felt bad in myself, looking for something more, looking for something higher. So I rattle along to this place the following Saturday. Boom! Oh, this is the answer. This is it. This feeling that I'm experiencing now. This is it. So basically, left everything, went down to London, got initiated into this spiritual group, and joined up, and lived in another sort of community with rules, regulations, and all sorts of weirdness for another 3 or 4 years.
Where was that? Was that in London or was that?
In London. Well, I travelled around actually. We travelled around. It was a Hindu sort of Hindu thing, a guru cult thing, but they're quite big in the 70s. There were different versions of. Travelled around a bit, and it was based on truth, and I still meditate to this day and feel tremendous amount of peace and whatever inside me. But they created this whole sort of way of managing people, which was crazy, really. And again, I stayed with that for a period of time, and until I just realised, well, I fell in love with one of the young women there, and obviously it didn't work out. It was a celibate community, it was whatever. So in the end, I decided this isn't for me, and I got out in about 1976. So I was about 23, I think, when I got out, and that was pretty life changing. Pretty life changing. And that's when, and about the same time, my father died, who I'd had a very difficult relationship with, not close to, aggressive between us. He didn't like the way I was going, really, although we had some peacemaking at the end, something at the end. And I just thought, what do I want to do with my life? Here we are. And I was working at that time as an auxiliary in a big mental health hospital in Liverpool, working with people who obviously had big breakdowns, some of whom had been in mental hospital for years. And I thought combination of finding some spirituality in myself, because I remember I'd gone to the Glastonbury Festival before, and I sort of realised I was standing on top of the Glastonbury tour, and I'd realised, well, actually, there's some meaning in this life, or I'm totally going mad, and I'd managed to straighten my life out and realised there was meaning, and the mind was a crazy thing, and I'd not been very well grounded. Had a really poor sense of attachment. I was very insecure, so I learned to meditate, got myself really sort of grounded in myself for the first time, and decided that I go to university. And at university in Bradford in late 70s, I decided I'd set up an alternative therapy centre for people who were really fucked up. Excuse my language. I knew people who'd been living in R.D. Laing's community in London. He was a radical psychiatrist who believed in not using drugs and not using ECT and not using sort of basket weaving as therapy, which is what I'd been trained in. Just talking therapy, really, and and being together. So I set up and got money to run this independent therapy centre in Bradford, which I ran for a couple of years. And that was the start of me going on the road in life that I knew would be the way for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Such a rich period of your life. I mean, coming out of school, trying to find yourself, the drugs phase, the kind of, the drug dealing phase, the moving to Wales, and then moving into the sort of religious sect side of things. I
Mm,
mean, that's one way to do your 20s, isn't it? And all the way along then, trying
mm,
to establish this sense of self. And when you talked about, in your teens, having that kind of LSD experience, feeling this, or being able to see that the self wasn't there, if you like. I had something very similar where I felt I fragmented into three pieces and could tell that I wasn't one, I wasn't whole. And it's very frightening. It's very frightening because
mhm,
the certainly for me, the feeling afterwards was I've wrecked myself. I now
mhm,
know something like I have no sort of tools to fix, and
mhm,
it's very frightening. Yeah, led for me to a lot of panic attacks and mental ill health. So,
mm,
along this journey, then you're finding some spirituality, but often with the healing journey, people have a lot of the kind of cognitive left brain. I now know what's really wrong with me, so I'm okay because I've got it in awareness. And a lot of people have a lot of the spirituality, but
mhm,
not many do the trauma healing work, get the language, get a structure, and then find there is spirituality, energy, the universe, whatever it might be. So it
mm.
sounded like you were pushing more towards the spiritual side, but then reaching that there was this talk based therapy towards the end of the 70s and setting up the center. So what happened next, and what came next?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that's when I really started to do a lot of work on myself. I think, I was all right. I was happy and I could be with people. And I started to have, I started to have girlfriends, some of whom it was really good, some of whom it was bad. It was, looking back, it was awful, really. The dynamics that I got into with some girlfriends at the time, because I'd put women on a pedestal, all those years, and then of course it wasn't like that, and I kept knocking at the wrong door, basically, um, during that period. But I was starting to be a lot happier. I was having a good life. I moved to London, and first of all, in a London school, ran what they call a nurture unit for young children, and all of this was healing me. I only realised that in respect that. So I started working with younger kids who had poor attachment, who had poor starts in life, who were withdrawn, who were messed up, and I spent a year running a nurture unit, and then the funding ran out, and I'd accepted a job somewhere else, and I saw just very late in the day an opportunity to work in a child and adolescent psychiatric unit, and I looked at that, applied for it. 120 odd people applied for it, went for interview, and just somehow I don't know what happened, but I got it, and that was a very important time for me because I worked there for 7 years. And for some reason, it all came out of me. I just knew what to do. I set up therapeutic groups. It was all run on like child-centered relating, art, drama, play, talking, and stuff. It was just a great time. And I did lots of work. These were the 80s. I did lots of work on myself. I trained as a therapist in different forms of therapy during this time, and also started working with some adults, and that increased over the time. Um, and that was a really good time, and I really developed, became very confident in myself. It all came over that time. I had a couple of really strong relationships, but neither of them lasted. And then when the second of the two sort of came to an end, and my ex was working in the same centre as me, I decided maybe it's time for me to move on. And again, that was oh my God. But I applied for and got a job as head of training at a boarding school for highly disturbed boys in on Exmoor. And that was a real challenge, because that was going back into a place in which the people that ran it, the kids, were just so messed up and so badly treated, and it was awful. Again, it was like going into a place where there suddenly was, I just felt, I can't do this. This doesn't feel so unsafe. But I'd also, and so lasted a term there, and I did some good work, but it was only a term. And then I'd applied for a job just out of the blue. I'd seen a job as head of a small therapeutic school in Newcastle, and I'd not heard anything. And it had transpired they'd re-advertised, and then they invited me for interview. And I went down and again talked about my vision, my values, my ideas. Got offered the job on the spot. That was really great. Although then I had to declare my drug convictions and convince them that I wasn't a fraudulent drug dealer or anything, which is a bit awful. I've been plagued with that through my adult life. But yeah, then went up to Newcastle and was able to sort of develop this therapeutic school further and introduce a lot of things to do with art, play, drama, therapeutic counselling, all that stuff, which for me has been the mainstream of my professional adult life. Those approaches, and it was really a good experience for me, and I was able to do some really helpful work with some really great kids. I mean, to give you one example, there was one 15-year-old red-haired Irish boy who was temperate like you won't believe. And one day he got upset, and I had at that time bought a black convertible XR3i sports car, brand new, and it was in the car park. And he'd got out into the car park and he decided to smash up all the cars in the car park, including my car. So me and the deputy head had to go out and get this boy who was, threatened to kill. Luckily he didn't have a knife or anything like that in those times. And I remember getting him, manhandling him, with love, into this office, and him screaming out, "I'll kill you, you effing bastard! I'll kill you, bastard!" And we just held him and held him and held him. And this is the bit I wanted to talk about. We held him and held him and held him and held him. And then suddenly he started to cry. And we had this 15-year-old boy, and he was crying and crying and crying and telling us how sorry he was, how bad he felt, how awful he felt, and all that stuff. And 5 minutes later, we were all sitting around drinking tea, and he completely transformed. And that was something that I'd learned about working with anger and working with all that repressed stuff that insecure people have inside them, to help it heal, and that was pretty powerful to me. That was an example of this work in action.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, that's that insight into how you help that boy. I think that's something I see a lot in the men's work I've done. I think with the Mankind Project and others is, you do things like carpet work where you'll go through a process. There's some somatic stuff in there. There's role play, or family constellations and internal family systems, all this stuff that's now got names around it. But essentially, it's just a group of benevolent men who can hold space and physicality, and then whatever comes out, and it is amazing to watch. When I did mine, physically it was 4 or 5 guys holding with love, holding me back as I moved such a huge amount of energy. You kind of do a few years work in an hour sometimes with things like that. So you mentioned play in your work, you mentioned talk therapy, also then this holding in this example. Is there something within your approach that you could kind of sum up, or how do you look at healing?
Well, it's funny because I mean, to this day, I've been having therapy, so it's a long term. But I was brought up a Catholic, as I mentioned earlier, and that was not good for me at all. And I managed to escape from Catholicism, thankfully, uh, and yeah, so that was quite quite a challenge. Could you just ask me the question again? I got into my Catholicism there.
Oh, I know. If we're going to go there, that's okay. But it was around your approach
Yeah,
to healing, to the work that you do with others.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, for me, the thing is, I've been brought up a Catholic, and it was all about guilt. And I
Mm.
had therapy about 4 years ago, and we turned that guilt into shame, and that was really helpful for me.
Mm.
Um, you know, and I think it is about the story, accepting the story of one's childhood, and really being able to put it all out there and be really honest about each bit, even though they sort of seem to be seem to be contrary. On the one hand there's this, on the one hand there's that, on the one hand, I love someone, on the one hand I was really angry, and just getting it all out there. And for me, it is about the therapy being loving, and being able to love, because I mean, I didn't love myself as a child, and so being loved deep inside me is really hard. And I know that in my work as therapy, it is about loving the person you're with, and giving them no judgment, and empathy, compassion, and just allowing the whole thing to come out, no matter how contrary it is. And I know for me, as I told you, I had this ambivalence about boarding school, love, hate, ambivalence about my sexuality. I had love, hate, gay, straight. I didn't know, there was all of those contradictions that I couldn't live with. And so I was false. I didn't know who I was. And so by allowing these different things out and up and to surface, there is some integration slowly and surely that can happen. And I think that's part of the journey, is allowing that. And also discovering that who I am is not that. They're part of me, but I'm more than that. And that is really reassuring, and really growthful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is huge, isn't it, Stephen? Thank you.
Yeah.
The point at which it wasn't just a bumper sticker that I am not my thoughts. When it
Mm,
actually, the day it finally landed with me, and then meditation helped, my own therapy helped, but to get that degree of objectivity and distance from your thoughts and what's going on up there, then you can start to actually find these parts of yourself, the hidden parts, the ones that are taking control. I use the archetypal model, king, warrior, magician, lover. Very helpful. There is fear, there is anger, there is grief, and there is joy. And you can dialogue with these parts and find out kind of who's having a problem, who's shouting that day and taking over. And it's really a marvel. There's so many wonderful modalities, tools, and techniques and things that are out there now, self-help, and you know with a therapist or counselor or coach. Group work's another one. The doing your one-to-one work is amazing. Particularly people who've been through boarding school stuff or early childhood stuff or CPTSD, healing in groups. When you've been traumatized in groups and had relational trauma, you're going to heal in relationship.
yeah.
And you mentioned, it's been difficult for you, sexuality, relationships over the years, but is there a happy ending? Did you
I
find
eventually
love?
found my partner in crime, or partner in life, who wasn't the archetypal imagination I had of this beautiful blonde goddess on the plinth. Was actually a very practical, down to earth human being who actually is a really good match for me. And we've raised a child. I mean, we sent a child to public school, but luckily it wasn't boarding school, and she didn't like it. So, you know, but uh, um, yeah, no, it's been great. We had a great time, and partnership it's been a challenge. I was difficult. I probably still am difficult. Some of that old stuff is still there. You know, some of that entitlement stuff, or all those things that from those days. But yeah, it's been great. And we bought a little cottage in France where we go a lot of time to chill, just to chill, particularly in the summer. We used to go there, or still do every summer, just to chill. It's been great. It's been great. So I'm much more integrated as a human being, no doubt.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you say as well about the thing about groups, because I was humiliated, in a group as a child by family members and friends, these big groups of drunken adults, really humiliated, and took it to therapy quite a lot of time. Then I ended up working as a group therapist, and I find that just so incredible and in fact, that humiliation became my strength. So the wound became my strength. And the thing I sort of avoided and whatever, when I allowed myself to go there, it's sort of, it's part of the architecture of my life now, part of the furniture of my living room. That happened, but I've learned so much from it. And, I can talk about it now, whereas I used to have guilt or shame or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, yeah, life has really gone on much more integrated. I've written some books on love and stuff like that. So it feels like the journey of life has really progressed for me.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? I mean, there are a school of thought, if you like, that I prescribe to, that life will kind of give you exactly as much as you can take at any one point, and it will give you things that you're supposed to learn and grow through and find. So, yeah, it's beautiful to hear your journey and that you're happy with your family now. So, what comes next for you then? What are you working on now? What do you want
Oh,
to do?
old age. I think I'm not old. I'm over 70, but I wouldn't say I'm old. But I think going gracefully and with dignity and into the latter part of life. I think, which is something I probably never said I'd wanted to do, but I think now prepared to do that journey because we're only on the planet for a limited amount of time, so we need to get the maximum out of it. And
Mm,
procrastination, putting off, and all those things, we need to try and stop that. So I think, going forward, living life to the full has been very much my motto in the last couple of years. Doing the things I want to do in life, enjoying life to the full, saying things to people that need to be said. Those sorts of things. Very important at this stage of life.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, that could be a real hangover I found from my early years was not being able to say the things that need to be said. So inherently,
Mm,
scanning a room, seeing who's there, finding out what they need from you, be whatever they need you to be,
mm,
stay safe at all costs. And
mm,
yeah, that sort of people pleaser until you're not.
mm,
Basically, people pleaser until you can't do it anymore. And then there's an explosion. And then, so that was very much my pattern. And
yeah, sure,
I see it a lot
sure.
in ex-boarders. I see it a lot in people who've had difficult childhoods with my coaching work with Seen and Heard. So the with given your personal experience and given your then professional experience, what are the kind of the healing must do's or the areas to explore if people have had the boarding school trauma, if people have had the childhood trauma stuff, you know, what would you urge them to explore?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because there's so much.
Mm,
What immediately comes up to me to start with is love, but that can be such a challenge for people who've been through the journey of boarding school and being away from love. But in a sense, not to chase love, but to find places where you can feel love, I think is really helpful because love will allow healing to happen, you know. And I mean, I tell people that for me, I walk a lot and being in nature, and I always feel so comfortable being in nature. I find it doesn't judge me. I don't have to be anything for it, and it's giving all the time. That's going to places in your life that do that for you. Uh, Being with people who enhance you as opposed to diminish you, I think and choose out some people, find people who do that for you. I think that's really important. I think, I would say it's a therapist, but I would recommend, anybody who's come through a difficult journey, what is called journey, to have some therapy with somebody who's able to go very deep with you, to go to your, not problem solving or, you know, not that, but to go deep, go into your roots, to go into the deepest part of yourself, to go into your deep past, to go into the difficult places and help you look at them. Because if you can look at the difficult places, you start to become just that little bit more freed up, that little bit better. And I think the other thing is find your vocation in life, find what inspires you, find what turns you on, find what lights you up, and choose those things in life, And then lastly, what can I learn from my journey? What can I learn from my boarding school time? What can I learn from it? Because there's bound to be something you can learn from that that'll actually be helpful.
Thank you, Stephen. Really insightful there. Yeah, where your wound lays is also where your gold lays, and yeah, there can be an awful lot that comes out once the therapy process comes on. But I'm just conscious of time today. It's been such an amazing journey together, learning a little bit more about you and your work and your life. Hugely thankful for that. So we'll just finish, if we can, just with a few sort of quick fire questions. So what in life have you changed your mind on most in the last few years? So has there been a real revelation?
What would change my life on? I think it's about forget about career, forget about goals from here, choose to be happy. I think would probably be significant. And I was still driven by the ego drives. There's nothing wrong with it, but I was still very driven by it. And 12 years ago, I decided to get off the rat race, left the university, and stepped out into a different way of living. And it's been great ever since.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And what coaching would you give your teenage self if you could? So maybe that teenager with the air pistol, or that teenager who's going down the shop to buy whiskey or whatever. Is there any coaching for him?
Well, there's two versions of coaching. I'm not sure at the moment. One would be do it better. You're going to break the rules and be a rebel. Do it in a way that's not actually destructive to you, Stephen. Or there might be one which would be like choose your battles. Choose with care how you're going to navigate this life. And take from it what can help you, and put down which is going to get you into deep trouble.
That sounds very profound. I think one of the biggest ones I ever heard was, is it better to be right or happy? And that one steered me well. A lot of the time I've chosen happiness over trying to be right.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Chris. Absolutely.
Well, perhaps there we'll start to wrap things up. But so if people are interested in getting hold of you or seeing more of your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, so on the Seen and I think probably on the Seen and Heard website, the therapist section, you'll find a link, I think, to my website, which has got loads of stuff on it about my journey and how I work, and I've got contact details. I'm not looking for people to come for therapy, but if you want to make contact with me, or if you want some therapy with me, you can contact me. But obviously, I just want to help really and help people heal themselves. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful words. We'll make sure that your contact details are in the show notes from today. So all there is left to do is to thank you so much for your time, Stephen, for your work. The amount of people you'll have helped over the years will be immeasurable, given the ripple effect of what therapy can do for families, communities in this country. So thank you so much, and we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's been profound just having this conversation. It's just going through my life. So thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciated it today, and I shall be reflecting, I'm sure, on our conversation. So yeah, thank you very much, Chris.
Beautiful. See you later.
Bye.